another video on sourdough because I've made quite a bit of this, like a few months, and I've got better at it, so now I can pass on the knowledge. So what I have found is different flours need different ratios of water. So and sourdough is all about the hydration, so it can be kind of quite difficult if you're first starting out to use the right amount of water. You want to get away with using as much water as possible, and then you'll get a better sourdough. However, more water means it's a little bit more difficult to work with, so you kind of need to pick the right kind of flour for what you're going to be doing, and how much water you want to put in, and kind of how much you want to spend, because that's a factor as well. So if you wanted to make, you can buy cheap supermarket flour like this stuff. This is about 55p for 1.5 kilos, and it's pretty good. You just need to use less water in something like that than you would do in this very strong white Canadian wheat bread flour. So I've kind of been through the recipes and done worked out which kind of ratio of water you need to use for each kind of different flour. So there's kind of like the really cheap stuff. There's the top end, the really strong white flour. It's a little bit more difficult to work with. Well, no, not really. That's not more difficult to work with. It just takes a different type of skill. And then you can get the supermarket own brand kind of stuff, which is very strong again, and it's almost the kind of same as that. And then you've got like normal bread flour, which is pretty good, but that requires a different level of water as well. So I'll put all the recipes down in the description. Which flour, I think it's down to the protein content and the gluten content of the flours, which flours that you can get away with using a different amount of water with. However, what I found is these two flours, well, this was in the local independent supermarket, and they were selling off 4 kilo bags for 50p. So I bought a few bags of that, and I view that as the middle of the road flour. So it's pretty good. That's the cheap flour, and I found that they've got similar amount of protein in them, but the only problem is, so what's that one? So that is got 11.3 grams of protein, and this one's got 11.7 grams of protein per 100 grams. However, you need this one. You can put more water in than this one, and that one you can put even more in. So that one's got a whopping 14 grams of protein per 100 grams. So, and what's this one got? This one has got, and this got 14.8, so that's even higher kind of still. So, but I've got a rough idea of how much water you can put, and it's got to do with the gluten and the protein content of the flour. So I'll do it in the descriptions. And then also we've got very strong wholemeal flour as well. To just use pure wholemeal flour, I find the bread a little bit too heavy, so what I normally do is I do half wholemeal flour and half white flour, and then I've got a recipe for that. And then also we've got some spelt flour, and I've got a recipe for that as well. That's quite heavy again, and that requires less flour as well. But I've worked some good recipes out, and I've also worked out a method that you can see. It's very difficult to kind of add more water. Certainly almost impossible to take that water away from a dough. So I've kind of worked out a way that we can have work the right kind of content of water out for the flour that we're using without having to ruin a batch of bread, or it kind of go wrong, because it's like a 2-day process in making sourdough, and you don't kind of want to waste that time by something that we can just do at the start and kind of work out what's a good level of water per the flour that we're using. So that's pretty straightforward, hopefully. So that out of the way. So yes, so I started the starter off. So I've already made the starter, and it's pretty good, but we need to activate it. So there's a couple of tablespoons worth of starter in there. I'll show you the starter. It's just in a jar like that. You need to feed it twice a week, so every 5 days is a good amount, with equal quantities of flour and water. So I normally feed it with 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. Give it a stir, and then make a note of 5 days time when I need to feed it again. So I've got a couple of tablespoons of that in with 300 grams of water and 300 grams of flour. Mix it all together, leave it somewhere out, and then it will slowly activate itself. It takes about 12 hours depending on the time of year. Also the type of the amount, going back to the water again, the amount of water that you can add to the flour is also affected by the time of year as well. So in the summertime the doughs tend to be a lot looser, whereas in the wintertime they tend to be a lot tighter. Using less water in the summertime is a good idea, and using a little bit more water in the wintertime is a good idea as well. So it's going to take about 12 hours before it gets really nice and bubbly, and then that will be the next step. So we'll be back in, well, it's already been going for about 4 hours, 5 hours. So in another 6 to 8 hours, that will be at a stage where it's all nice and activated, and the carbon dioxide is coming up in bubbles, and it's all bubbly, and then that's the next stage. We can start making some bread. Pretty straightforward. Don't think I've missed anything. I will think of things and then add them to the next part of the video. As you can see now, the starter is really bubbly and giving off lots of carbon dioxide. So we know that it's really active and it's ready to go. So we need to mix the starter and the flour and the water, and then we need to leave it for an hour. What this does, it's a funny thing to do, and I didn't really understand it when I first did it, but it's quite an important thing to do, because what it allows it to do is it allows all the liquid to completely saturate all the flour, and then when you need it, you can actually, it's a way of being able to introduce more water to the dough, because if you add it and then knead it straight away, you could have added more water to it. It's difficult to kind of explain, but it kind of works. I understand it in my head. I'm not probably the best person to kind of understand it, but we mix everything together roughly, we leave it for an hour, everything completely saturates together, and then we can actually get more water into a dough. Now, the last time I used this flour, I thought I could put more water into it. So I'm going to do it in 2 batches. I normally do a kilo of flour, so I'm going to do 500 grams of flour, and I'm going to add a little bit more water than I normally would for 500 grams than I did last time. And then we'll give it after an hour, we'll give it a little bit of a knead, and if it's all right, and it's a good dough, I'll know that that's about the right amount of water. If I put too much water in, I'll mix the second half of the dough and we'll put less water in, and that'll kind of compensate for it. So we need, that's 500 grams of the flour, and then we need 300 grams of starter, which is a little bit tricky and a little bit gloopy to say the least. Try that out a bit more. Add a bit more back. Three more grams, 3 grams. There we go, 300. And then, I've forgotten what I put in. Now we get another kind of glass so we can measure exactly how much I put in. So then, last time I put in, for every 500 grams of flour, I put in 250 grams, 225 grams of water. So I'm putting in 250 grams of water this time. So we'll just check. Just about, yeah, there we go, 250 grams worth of water. And then salt as well. Now, be careful with salt, because different types of salt are saltier than others. So 5 grams of that salt is going to be a lot saltier than 5 grams of that salt. I don't fully understand why, I just know, and sometimes when something's said to put a teaspoon of salt in, I put a teaspoon of free running salt in, like that, and it's been too salty. So we go on a pinch pinch is that much. A pinch of fluoride salt weighs 4 grams. Right, mix this together and then we'll leave it for an hour. Lots of people don't put the starter in at this point. I kind of think, I don't understand why yet. There will come a point where I understand why you don't add the starter at this point and you just mix the flour, the water and salt together. But I just kind of think to myself that the starter's a lot wetter than the actual dough that you're making. So you kind of want everything to be at the same amount of saturation, water, liquid-wise, if that makes sense. So I can't understand why you don't add the starter. So I just think, well, you might as well add the starter, and then everything's rocked and ready to go. And the starter's also had a chance to start fermenting the dough as well. That comes together quite nicely. It doesn't need to be too mixed together. It just needs to be all the flour incorporated into the dough. I think we'll probably be good with this. So, mix it all together, we'll leave it for an hour, we'll give it a bit of a knead, see how it feels to be kneaded, because the dough will be different after an hour. You'll see. It'll have a different texture. So we'll see what this is like after an hour. And then, if it looks like there's a good amount of water in it without it being too soft or too hard, then I'll do the same process again with another 500 grams of flour, wait an hour, and then we'll give it all the knead together. But I'm saying you leave this for an hour, but if you left it for 2, that's fine. It's quite a forgiving dough is sourdough. I think that'll be okay actually. It's quite a forgiving dough is sourdough. You can overprove sourdough, and it's fine. All you really do is just kind of add to the sour kind of flavour, which is a good thing in some cases. But it's if it overproves for 2 or 3 hours, it doesn't really matter, because the yeast carries on producing carbon dioxide. It's not like normal yeast, normal bread yeast, which has only got so much of a life in it. It kind of expels all its energy and then dies, whereas a sourdough keeps on living. As long as there's flour and water in the dough, it keeps on living and producing carbon dioxide. It gets to the stage where it's too sour, which is not what you want, but it can be kind of quite forgiving, to say the least. Right, there we go. So we'll leave that for it. We'll cover it. I'll use a old shower cap. We don't like plastic waste. So I've got these shower caps that I use. It just cuts down on the amount of cling film plastic wrap that you've got. So we'll leave that for an hour so it doesn't dry out, and then we're back and then we'll give it a bit of a knead and we'll see if that's the right kind of amount of water for that amount of flour. Right, the dough's had an hour. Let's have a look at it. That's alright, is that? That's alright, is that? Yeah, I think the first time I used this flour, it was a lot harder than that. That's kind of quite nice and soft. Any softer than that, it would be a problem. I mean, the bread that I made was nice, but that's just a slightly softer dough, so that'd be nicer. So we'll make up another batch. We'll do another. Put that on the back. Because I want to use a kilo of flour. So this is just a way of. So if you're worried about you've got a new flour and you don't want to ruin your bread, what you just simply do is you do half the normal amount of flour. Have a trial run, see if it's what kind of consistency the dough is, and if it's good consistency, you can make the same amount of dough again, adding that amount of water. If it's a little bit too dry, you can make another batch, half batch of the dough, and just add a little bit more or less water as appropriate. Just cuts out that ruining dough. And if you go out and you're making a kilo worth of flour, you might only have one bag of flour in. It saves you having to go out and buy more, or faffing about and putting a bit more flour in to dry it out and not kind of getting the recipe kind of right. So that's 500 grams. We want another 300 grams of starter. I'm just going to do most of that. 5. bit too much. And too much again. Still a bit too much. There we go, that's about right. Well, 1 gram out, that's fine. Pinch of free running salt. And then we just need to weigh out. Oh, so it was 250 grams. That 250 grams in there, and then mix round, leave this for an hour, and then we'll knead all the dough together rather than having to knead it twice. As you get better with dough, you can add more water and you'll know what you're doing and not scared of it. You become more confident and you get a feel for things. So the flour that you particularly like to use, you'll get a good recipe for it. And if you want to move up to a different flour, or maybe incorporate some wholemeal into it, or some whole grain, or some spelt, or some of these really fancy artisan flours, you can work up to that. But if you just want to have a start, if you want to have a play around with making some sourdough bread, I just recommend buying the cheapest supermarket strong flour that you can get your hands on. Have a play around, see how you go, get better. It's a cheap hobby and you get to eat it. And you'll see later on, but it's quite forgiving as a sourdough. So you can leave it to prove in the fridge overnight, or you can leave it out and disappear out of the house for a few hours and not worry about it overproving, because the final proof we're going to do in the fridge anyway, which can be in the fridge for anything between 12 hours, 14 hours, 24 hours at a push. You know, and so whereas if you're making normal bread, it proves in a certain amount of time, and if you overprove it, it's ruined. Sourdough's not like that. Anyway, right, so that's fine. That can live there. That can live next to it. That on there. Now that's going to have had 2 hours completely, letting the water completely saturate all the flour, and that's only going to have an hour. But that doesn't matter. It just goes to show that you can actually. There is a special word for it, a French word, but I've forgotten what the word is. Begins with L, or sounds like it begins with L. But you can leave it 2 hours. You know what I mean? You don't have to do it for. It doesn't have to just be for an hour. An hour's like the minimum, but 2 hours you can leave it for 2 hours. It's fine, and then knead it after the 2 hours. But anyway, there we go. So that's how you work out how much flour to put into the water to put into the flour, if you're a little bit worried. But there we go. That's it for the moment. The hour is up, so let's have a knead. Maybe the dough's a little bit too soft. And I think I forgot to add the salt. So, get that out of the way. That was the fresh one, so we'll just put that salt in there. And that'll knead all the way through as we're kneading it all together. So, kneading. I'm not going to show you 10 minutes worth of kneading, but you need to knead it for 10 minutes. You don't need to knead it for a solid 10 minutes. You can knead it for 5 minutes, have a little bit of a break, and then knead it for another 5 minutes. It's only important that you knead it for 10 minutes. It doesn't matter if that 10 minutes is done in 3 batches or 4 batches, because it's quite a strenuous thing to do, and you just kind of need to get better at it. So I always push and pull back and push and pull back. It's just getting the gluten working in the dough. Oh, should put the timer on 10 minutes. 10 minutes is normally enough. And what happens is the dough changes. As you're kneading it, it becomes smoother. Well, my board's a little bit of a mess, but I'm not really bothered about that. Oh yeah, so flour is abrasive, so be careful what you're kneading dough on and rolling pastry on, because over time it will dull this surface that you're kneading on, which is fine if you're not bothered about the surface. But if you've got nice, slightly shiny kitchen worktops, you don't want to be kneading on them because it'll make a mess over time. So what I've got is I've got a old chopping board which I butt up against the wall, and then I'm always pushing against the wall so it's not sliding anywhere. So it's just kind of ideal. So that kind of motion, push down with the heel and pull around. So as long as it's moving and you've been quite aggressive with it, that's kneading. There's different methods. You've got to look those up on YouTube somewhere, but I always do that. I don't use a machine. I don't think it really does a good job of it. It doesn't really seem to move the dough around enough, and I like to see the dough move around and you get a feel for it. So this is what I'm doing. 10 minutes of kneading. I'm going to pause. If the dough changes too much, I'll show you what happened to the dough. But you need to keep it moving as well, otherwise it wants to relax and start getting sticky. As long as you keep moving it, it'll be fine. But that's about, beginner wise, that's about as soft as the dough wants to be. Any softer than that and it starts getting difficult to work with. But anyway, so I'll pause, carry on kneading, and you'll be back when I'm done. Right, we've had 10 minutes. I'm a little bit out of breath. So there we go. Nice soft dough, all combined. Very malleable. That's perfect, is that? Right. Back in there. Squish it down a little bit. And then swimming cap, shower cap on, and let it double in size for however long it takes, depending on the time of year. It's quite late now, so I'm going to go to bed. So I'm happy to leave this proving overnight, so 8 hours, depending on what time I get up. It might be 10 hours, but it might be 9 hours, but it'll be fine. But if it overproves, that's not a problem, because it's sourdough and it carries on proving as long as it's got food, and there's loads of food for it to eat in there. Yeah, so just a quick note on, so when you're making sourdough, you're normally aiming for about 65% of the weight of the flour should be the water. That's quite, that's the hydration. That's quite a lot. Is that? That also takes into account the water that's in the starter as well. So 65% of the flour weight. So if there's a kilo of flour, there should be 650 grams worth of water in that dough. I normally do a little bit less than that because I find getting up to 65% is a little bit unmanageable depending on which flour you kind of use. But 65% is a good kind of like a good benchmark. I have done it in the past, and it depends on the flour that you use, but it wants to be about 65% and then a little bit lower. I just tend to go a little bit lower just to make the dough just that little bit easier to work with. But anyway, there we go. So let it double in size, depending on the time of the year. Might take 6 hours, might take 8 hours, might take 12 hours. All just depends on how warm or cold the place is that you're leaving it to proof. As you can see, the bread has doubled in size. Well, it has exploded into life. So there's lots of energy in this at the moment, so we need to knock it back and then we need to chill it before we put it in the proving baskets. We put it in the proving baskets now and then put it in the fridge straight away. There'll still be so much energy in it that it'll overprove in the proving baskets, and that's not what we want. We don't want it to double in size again, because a lot of the rise in of the bread is going to come in the oven. It's made a mess of this. I don't know what I call it. Of my shower cap, but not to worry. I'll sort that out in a minute. Right, so knocking back basically means knocking the air out of it, so we just need to go through it, get it away from the sides. That. And then, so I need to chill it down. By chilling it down, I'm putting it in the fridge. It'll just slow the process of fermenting and proving down, so we can then put it into improving baskets and then give it a slow ferment for 10 or 12 hours before we bake. So just really knock the air out of it like that. It will prove again because there's lots of energy in it, and it's still a little bit warm. It'll take a while for the fish to cool it down. So then just cover back on in the fridge for 2-3 hours just to cool it down, and then we'll roll it. And then we'll roll the dough and put it in the proving baskets. As you can see, the dough has risen slightly as it's been in the fridge, which is fine, but it's slowed down. It's slowed down fermenting and rising now, so that's a good thing. So now we can put it in the proving baskets and it won't rise too much. Just need to see how much dough we've got weight wise. I should know, but we'll just make sure, and then we can divide it into 3. About 2 kilos, so we want about 700 grams. About 700 grams. So into 3. I'm just going to make 2 loaves. I've got something else planned with some of the dough. So that's a bit more. And a bit more. A bit more. There we go. It's about 700. Slightly over 700. It's just under 700, so that one's fine. Which isn't that one? That's okay. Right, so now we need to shape the dough. So knock any excess air out of it. Like that. And then we're going to create a ball, and we're going to wrap it in on itself. We need maybe a little bit of flour, not too much. So we now need to shape the dough. This is going to, what we're going to do is we're going to draw the top down of that dough and push it around the sides like that. What it's going to do is create tension on the top of the dough and give us that tension in the dough that gives, when we slice it before we put it in the oven, gives us that nice split that then the dough wants to explode out of. But first of all, we can't just do that. It needs to create some tension. So it's a case of kind of doing that kind of motion by pulling it tight and pushing it underneath. So it's quite a sticky dough. If there's any more water in this, would be kind of quite a difficult process. But I just want a little bit of flour. So as you can see, it's pulling the dough around and pushing it into there. So it's creating that tension. So that's looking better. So it's that kind of motion if we do it slowly. I always forget that on some videos, it always annoys me on some videos where people do things too quickly and you can't really tell what they're doing. So it's kind of like a press around, a push, and then a move around like that. That kind of motion. Then into the proving basket. You can make your own. I picked some up in a charity shop of all places, and they were really cheap. But I thought they were kind of quite expensive. But you can make your own, or you can buy them. So and then just a case of making it a little bit more shaped, like the bread basket, like the proving basket. So it fits in nicely, and then this is going to be the top of the bread, and we need to put the top downwards, so it's like that. And then because what's going to happen is we're going to turn the bread out into the cast iron pan, which we're going to cook the bread in, and then just a little bit of flour on top, just in case something happens in the fridge and it rises a little bit more than we expected. We just don't want it to stick to the wrapping, the shower cap. So that's that one, and then we'll do the other one as well. So squish the air out of it, or most of the air, and then that kind of motion again. like that. So it's pulling that dough round like that. Just have a play around with it. It's one of those things, you just get better at things as you do them. And it's cheap, isn't it? Flour's pretty cheap. So if you mess up, it doesn't really matter because it's all a learning experience. So there you go. It should be tight enough. Next proving basket, already got some flour in. So it's a little bit shaped like the dough. That crack is fine. So a little bit of flour on top. And then shower cap on. Cut down on the plastic waste. And then they're going to go in the fridge for 10, 12 hours. Can be a little bit longer, it doesn't really matter, it kind of depends what time of day it is. It'll be probably a little bit longer than 12 hours because it's late afternoon now, and depends on kind of what time I get up tomorrow morning. But you can almost go to 24 hours in the fridge in this state. You know, it's like a slow proof fermentation from now on. And then next bit of the video is when we'll be baking, which is pretty straightforward. Right, they've been in the fridge for 12 hours, slightly risen, which is okay, and kind of what we want. So we need to cook them. So the oven is on, it's on full whack, whatever that is, and it's on fan as well. And it's been heating up, and the cast iron pot's been in the oven as well. So, cast iron pot, and then we're going to turn out the bread dough into the pot like that. That's fine, we won't move that. And then we need to slice along there like that. That's going to give us that nice explosion. Ooh, am I missing something? And then a little spray of water. Don't spray on the cut. We want to spray along here. If we spray on the cut, what will happen is it'll seal it, so it won't split open. So spray on that side, and then get the lid ready. Spray there, lid on, and then in the oven for 30 minutes. The first one normally takes 30 minutes, the second one normally takes about 25. Lid on, there's no point taking the lid, you don't have to take the lid off to brown the bread outside of the oven, just into the oven, 30 minutes, and we'll have a look at what it's like then. Hours up, let's have a look. No. Oh, there we go. So, nice explosion. Get that, it's nice and crispy on the outside. Hollow sounding. So, that pot can go back in the oven just to heat up slightly before we put the next one in. We'll let that cool on a wire rack, and then we'll have a cut into it and we'll see what it's like. Two loaves are now cool. So let's cut into one. Which one am I going to cut into? That one. Let's have a look at that. There we go. Look at that. It's impressive, isn't it? That's impressive. So there is another technique with sourdough where you fold the dough and you get these, and I think the reason for that is it's so you create lamination and you get those big air pockets, which is very nice to look at. I'll probably get around to it having a go at some stage, but I think it takes quite a lot of work and quite a lot of time commitment. It's okay if you're in a bakery and you're making lots of sourdough, but if you're just making a couple of those for yourself, you don't really want to dedicate a few hours of your day holding the dough 3 or 4 times over maybe 3 or 4 hours. It kind of, as long as if you're a busy person, I can't, it's difficult to kind of find that time. So I always kind of think I don't want to do that because I don't want to be tied to the bread that much. I want it to fit around my schedule, not me to kind of fit around the bread. Definitely if you're a baker, obviously if you're cooking them at home, then if you want good results with a nice split, then that's the minimum that you can do to get away with it. But there you go, it will be delicious. And it needed, I tried the bread before with 50 grams less of water, and it really needed that 50 grams more just to kind of open up the grain a little bit. But there you go, sourdough, an update because I got better and wanted to share the results.